Mafia boss followed his blonde maid every day after work. What he saw left him in tears. The air in the back room of the Gilded Lily tasted of stale cigar smoke and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. It was a scent Dante Valerio had known since he was a boy, a smell that permeated the tailored fabric of his three-piece suits and clung to the leather of his shoes. He sat at the head of a heavy oak table. His posture relaxed, almost languid, which only served to terrify the three men sitting opposite him. In the underworld of Harborview, noise was a sign of weakness. The loudest man in the room was usually the one trying to convince himself he was brave. Dante never raised his voice. He never had to. The man currently speaking was sweating through his collar. His name was Tony, a mid-level earner who had let a shipment of imported electronics disappear off a loading dock in the East End. Tony was rambling, his hands moving erratically as he tried to explain the unexplainable. Dante simply watched him. He had dark eyes, the color of espresso without cream, and when he focused them on a person, it felt less like being looked at and more like being dismantled. He tapped his index finger against the polished wood of the table. 1 tap, 2 taps. Tony stopped talking immediately. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. "I do not want excuses," Dante said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the room. "I want results. You have 48 hours to find what is mine. Tony, if you do not, I will assume you took it yourself, and you know how I handle thieves." Tony nodded vigorously, his face pale. "I understand. Mr. Valerio, thank you." Dante waved a hand, dismissing them. As the men scrambled out of the room, tripping over their own feet to escape his orbit, Dante felt a familiar wave of exhaustion wash over him. It was not a physical tiredness, but a deep, spiritual fatigue. His life was a series of calculations, threats, and acquisitions. He possessed power that city councilmen envied and police captains feared, yet his world was shrinking, confined to dim rooms and conversations about loyalty that were only as true as the money on the table. He stood up, adjusting his cuffs, and walked out the back exit where his black sedan was waiting. The engine purred to life as his driver, a burly man named Frank who had been with the family for 20 years, opened the door. "Home," Dante said, sinking into the leather seat. As the car wound its way through the neon-soaked streets of Harborview, climbing the winding roads toward the wealthy district of the Heights, Dante stared out the window. He was the king of the city, but heavy was the head that wore the crown. He craved silence. He craved a space where no one wanted anything from him, where he did not have to look for a knife in every shadow. His penthouse was supposed to be that sanctuary. It was a fortress of glass and steel perched atop the tallest residential spire in the city. The elevator opened directly into the foyer, and as Dante stepped inside, the chaos of the streets below vanished, replaced by a cool, climate-controlled stillness. But he was not alone. In the living room, a small figure was moving with rhythmic efficiency. It was Hannah Reed, his maid. She'd been working for him for 3 months, yet Dante felt he knew less about her than he did about the strangers he passed on the sidewalk. She was a ghost in his home, a blur of blonde hair and a gray uniform who ensured his scotch was always stocked. His floors were mirrored surfaces, and his bed was made with military precision. Dante paused in the entryway, watching her. She was dusting the intricate sculptures on the mantel, her movements careful and deliberate. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, but she carried herself with the heaviness of someone much older. "Good evening, Mr. Valerio," Hannah said. She did not turn around, but her shoulders stiffened slightly. She had sensed his presence before he had even made a sound. "Good evening, Hannah," Dante replied, placing his keys on the console table. She finished dusting the sculpture and turned, keeping her eyes lowered. "I have finished the master suite and the kitchen. Is there anything else you require before I leave for the night?" Dante looked at her. Really looked at her. Usually. He walked past her as if she were part of the furniture, another pristine object in a house full of them. But tonight, the weariness in his own bones made him attuned to the exhaustion in others. He noticed the dark, bruised circles beneath her eyes, distinct against her pale skin. She looked as though she had not slept in a week. He looked down at her shoes. They were cheap white canvas sneakers, the kind one could buy at a discount store, and they were falling apart. The rubber sole on the left foot was peeling away from the fabric, and the canvas was gray with ingrained city dust. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her apron, her knuckles white. "No, that will be all," Dante said. She nodded and moved toward the utility closet to put away her supplies. Dante walked to the wet bar and poured himself a glass of amber liquid. He took a sip, letting the burn settle in his chest, but he did not take his eyes off her. He watched as she pulled a phone from her pocket. It was an old model, the screen spiderwebbed with cracks. She tapped the screen, her fingers trembling slightly. It was 5:55 in the evening. She checked the phone at this exact time every single day. He had noticed the pattern before, but he had never thought to question it. Now, seeing the tremor in her hands, curiosity pricked at him. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before sliding it back into her pocket. She took a deep breath, smoothing her apron, and began to gather her coat. "Hannah," Dante said. She froze, one arm halfway into her thin beige coat. She turned slowly, her blue eyes finally meeting his for a fleeting second before darting away to focus on his tie. "Yes, sir?" "You work hard," Dante observed. "The penthouse is large. It is a lot for one person to manage." "I do not mind the work, sir," she said softly. Her voice was melodic but guarded, like a piano played with the soft pedal pressed down. "I have some files I need organized in the study." Dante lied. He did not need help, but the sight of her worn shoes bothered him in a way he could not articulate. It offended his sense of order that someone under his roof looked so threadbare. "If you stay another hour, I will pay you $200. It was a generous offer. More than generous. It was likely what she made in 3 days. Dante expected her to nod eagerly, to thank him profusely. Instead, Hannah stiffened. Her jaw tightened, a small muscle jumping in her cheek. She finished putting on her coat, buttoning it all the way to her chin. "I appreciate the offer. Mr. Valerio," she said, her voice firm, "but I cannot stay. I must leave at 6 o'clock. Dante frowned, setting his glass down on the marble counter with a sharp clink. The refusal stung his pride, but more than that, it confused him. Who turned down $200 for an hour of simple filing? "You are turning down extra money?" Dante asked, his tone sharpening slightly. "I have obligations." "Sir," Hannah said. She picked up her bag, a frayed tote that looked as heavy as a sack of bricks. "I will see you tomorrow. Have a good night." She turned and walked toward the elevator. Dante watched her go, baffled. She moved with a sense of urgency, checking her watch as the elevator doors slid open. She stepped inside, and as the doors closed, he saw her lean her head back against the metal wall and close her eyes, the polite mask slipping to reveal a look of utter desperation. The next evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with a strange tension. Dante had returned early, skipping a dinner with a corrupt union leader because he found himself distracted. He sat in the living room, ostensibly reading a report on shipping lanes, but his eyes kept drifting over the top of the paper. Hannah was vacuuming the hallway near his office. The hum of the machine was a steady drone, usually annoying, but today it covered the silence that Dante usually found so oppressive. He stood up to refill his drink and walked toward the hallway. As he approached, the vacuum noise ceased. Hannah had bent down to unplug the machine. In the sudden quiet, he heard a sound so faint he almost missed it. She was humming. It was a soft, melancholic tune, something slow and sweet. It sounded like a lullaby. Dante stopped, listening. It was the first time he had heard her make a sound that was not a direct response to an order. It made her seem real, a human being with an internal life rather than just an employee. Hannah stood up and turned around, not realizing he was standing right there. She gasped, flinching back. Her heel caught on a patch of marble floor he had spilled water on earlier and forgotten to mention. Her feet went out from under her. Dante moved on instinct, his reflexes, honed by years of dodging swings and shots, were faster than thought. He stepped forward and caught her around the waist, his arm acting as a steel band to keep her from hitting the hard stone. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. They were pressed together, her small body colliding with his solid frame. Her hands had flown up to brace herself, and they were now splayed flat against his chest, right over his heart. He could feel the heat of her palms through his dress shirt. Hannah looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. Up close, Dante saw flecks of gray in the blue of her irises. He saw the flutter of her long lashes and the flush of pink rising in her cheeks. He could smell her. Not expensive perfume, but something simple and clean, like vanilla soap and rain. Dante felt a jolt go through him, an unexpected surge of heat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. His fingers, wrapped firmly around her waist, tightened for a fraction of a second. She felt fragile, yet there was a wiry strength to her beneath the uniform. "I am so sorry," Hannah stammered, breathless. "I did not see you. I slipped." Dante did not release her immediately. He held her gaze, feeling the rapid staccato of her heart beating against his own chest. The air between them grew heavy, charged with a sudden, confusing electricity. He looked at her lips, which were parted slightly, and a dangerous thought flickered in his mind, a desire to know if she tasted as sweet as the vanilla she smelled of. He pushed the thought away, the discipline of a lifetime clamping down on the impulse. He stood her upright, steadying her until she found her footing, then pulled his hand away as if her uniform were on fire. "Be careful," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "The floor is wet." "Yes, yes, of course," Hannah whispered. She stepped back, putting distance between them, hugging her arms around herself as if she were cold. "Thank you, Mr. Valerio." She turned quickly, grabbing the handle of the vacuum cleaner with trembling fingers, and hurried toward the laundry room. Dante remained in the hallway, his hand still tingling where it had touched the curve of her waist. He stared at the empty space where she had been, his heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. Why did she affect him? She was a maid. She was a quiet, plain thing who wore shoes that were falling apart. She was nothing like the glamorous, dangerous women he usually associated with, and yet the memory of her body pressed against his made his blood run hot. 20 minutes later, Hannah emerged from the back of the apartment, wearing her coat and carrying her bag. She kept her head down as she passed the living room. "Good night, sir," she called out softly without stopping. Dante did not answer immediately. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down. It was winter in Harborview, and the sun had long since set. The streets below were a grid of yellow headlights and dark shadows. He watched until he saw a small figure emerge from the lobby of his building. From this height, she was just a speck, but he recognized the beige coat. He watched her pause at the corner, looking left and right before hurrying across the street. A strange knot formed in Dante's chest. It was a tightness he did not recognize. It felt like worry. It felt like protectiveness. "Why do you care?" he asked his reflection in the glass, but he could not look away. He watched her until she turned a corner and disappeared into the labyrinth of the city. He realized then that he did not know where she went. He did not know where she lived. He realized that for the 6 hours she was in his home, she was under his protection. But the moment she stepped outside, she was prey in a city full of predators. The next afternoon, Dante sat in the back of his sedan as Frank navigated the afternoon traffic. Hannah had arrived at the penthouse earlier that morning, looking even more exhausted than usual. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying, though she had composed herself the moment she saw him. "Frank," Dante said, his eyes on the rearview mirror. "Yes, boss. How does the girl get home?" Dante asked. Frank frowned, glancing at Dante in the mirror. "Which girl?" "The maid, Hannah." "Does she take the bus? There is a stop 2 blocks over." Frank hesitated. "No, boss. I have seen her a few times when I am waiting for you. She walks." "She walks?" Dante repeated, incredulous. "It is freezing outside. And she leaves at 6. It is pitch black. Yeah, she walks fast. Though," Frank said, "heads toward the East End." Dante felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The East End was not just a poor neighborhood, it was a war zone. It was territory controlled by the Kane Syndicate, a rival faction that dealt in the kind of filth Dante refused to touch. It was a place where people went missing and nobody asked questions. "She walks to the East End alone every night?" Dante asked, his voice low and dangerous. Frank nodded. "Seems so. I offered her a ride once, about a week ago, just to be nice. She looked at me like I was trying to kidnap her. Said she likes the fresh air." "Fresh air?" Dante scoffed. In the East End, the only thing in the air was smog and despair. His curiosity had hardened into something sharper: suspicion. Why would a young woman walk through the most dangerous part of the city alone? Why did she refuse money? Why were her hands always shaking? Was she in trouble? Or was she involved in something that could threaten him, the paranoid part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive this long, whispered that she could be a spy? She could be running information to his enemies, but then he remembered the way she had felt in his arms. He remembered the lullaby she had been humming. She did not feel like a spy. She felt like someone holding onto the edge of a cliff by her fingertips. Dante checked his watch. It was 5:30 in the afternoon. "Take me home," Dante ordered. "We have that meeting with the union rep at 7, Frank reminded him. "Cancel it," Dante said. Frank blinked. "Cancel it? Boss, that took 3 months to set up." "I said cancel it," Dante snapped, "and then I want you to wait downstairs. Switch cars. Take the sedan with the tinted windows, the one we use for surveillance." Frank's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "You expecting trouble, boss?" "I do not know yet," Dante said, looking out the window as the city blurred by. When they arrived at the building, Dante went up to the penthouse. He moved silently, observing Hannah as she finished her tasks. She was wiping down the kitchen counters, her movements frantic, checking the clock on the wall every 30 seconds. At 5:55, she pulled out her phone. The ritual. She stared at it, her face pale, then shoved it away. She grabbed her coat, not bothering to button it fully before she picked up her heavy bag. "Good night, Mr. Valerio," she called out, her voice tight. "Good night, Hannah," Dante said from the doorway of his study. He waited until the front door clicked shut. He counted to 10. Then he moved. He grabbed his long wool coat and shrugged it on, bypassing the elevator she had taken and heading for the service lift that would deposit him in the garage. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther, silent and swift. Frank was waiting in the unmarked dark sedan, the engine idling. Dante slid into the back seat. "She just came out the front," Frank said, pointing. Dante looked. Hannah was walking briskly down the sidewalk, her head ducked against the biting wind. She was clutching her bag tight to her side. "Follow her," Dante commanded. "Keep your distance. 1 car length back. Do not let her see you." "You got it," Frank said, easing the car into traffic. Dante watched Hannah's retreating figure. She looked so small against the backdrop of the towering skyscrapers. She was walking straight into the dark heart of the city, and for the first time in his life. Dante Valerio was following a woman not to possess her or to interrogate her, but simply because the thought of looking away terrified him. The sedan slipped into the stream of cars, a dark shark in the water, trailing the girl with the worn-out shoes as she disappeared into the evening crowd. What began as an impulsive decision born of suspicion quickly calcified into a ritual, as necessary to Dante Valerio as the oxygen in his lungs or the bourbon in his glass. The initial justification, that he was vetting an employee for potential security risks, dissolved within 3 days, replaced by a darker, more compelling need to understand the enigma of Hannah Reed. For the first time in his career, the precise clockwork of Dante's criminal empire began to slip. He cut short a negotiation with the dock workers union, leaving thousands of dollars in potential revenue on the table simply because the clock on the wall had ticked past 5:30. His lieutenants exchanged confused, terrified glances, wondering if their boss was ill or if a war was brewing that they had not been briefed on. They did not know that the most feared man in Harborview was rushing not to a sit-down with a rival Don, but to the back seat of an unmarked sedan to trail a young woman with holes in her shoes. Dante told himself he was merely gathering intelligence. Information was currency, and Hannah was a blank ledger he intended to fill. On Tuesday, the rain turned the city into a blurred watercolor of grays and blacks. From the dry warmth of his car, parked half a block away, Dante watched Hannah hurry down 4th Street. She did not go home. Instead, she ducked into a place called Lou's Diner, a narrow, grease-stained establishment wedged between a pawn shop and a boarded-up electronics store. Dante watched through the rain-streaked window as she tied a stained white apron over her clothes. She did not rest. There was no transition period between scrubbing his marble floors and pouring coffee for the rough clientele of the East End. She moved with the same efficiency, but the context had changed. Here, the air was thick with the smell of frying oil and cigarette smoke. He watched her work. She carried heavy trays of food to tables occupied by men with calloused hands and tired eyes. She poured refills before cups were empty. She smiled at them. But Dante, observing through the telescopic lens of his own detachment, saw the cracks in the porcelain. It was a tired smile, thin and brittle. Did not reach her eyes. Every time the bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival, Hannah flinched. It was a subtle movement, a tightening of her shoulders, a quick, fearful dart of her eyes toward the entrance before she forced herself to relax. She was terrified, not of the work, but of who might walk through that door. Dante felt a strange irritation rise in his chest. He paid her well. He paid her above the market rate for domestic staff. Why was she slaving away in this hovel for tip money that barely amounted to pocket change? Was she greedy, or was she in some kind of trouble that his salary could not cover? The thought that she might be debasing herself for drug money crossed his mind, but he dismissed it. Her eyes were too clear, her focus too sharp. This was desperation, not addiction. 2 days later, the routine changed. Hannah did not go to the diner. Instead, she walked 6 blocks to a community shelter run by a local church. It was a chaotic, noisy place, filled with the city's forgotten souls. Dante instructed Frank to park across the street. He rolled the window down an inch, letting the sounds of the neighborhood drift in. He saw Hannah standing near the entrance, but she was not working in the same way she did at the diner. She was kneeling on the pavement, eye level with a small girl who was clutching a ragged doll. Hannah was fixing the girl's hair, her fingers moving gently to braid the tangled strands. Dante leaned forward, squinting into the gloom. He saw Hannah say something, and then, for the first time since he had met her, he saw her laugh. It was not the polite, deferential noise she made at the penthouse. This was genuine. Her head tipped back, her face softening, the harsh lines of exhaustion smoothing out for a fleeting second. She hugged the child, then stood up to greet an older woman who embraced her like family. Dante sat back in the leather seat, feeling like an intruder in a way he never had before. At his home, she was a ghost, here, amidst poverty and struggle. She was vibrant. She possessed a warmth he had never seen, a capacity for joy that seemed impossible given the weight she carried. It made him feel cold. It made his glass-walled penthouse feel like a mausoleum, but the warmth was short-lived. Friday brought the darkness back. The sky was a bruise of purple and black as evening settled over the city. Hannah left the penthouse late, delayed by a spill in the kitchen. She walked faster than usual, her head down, cutting through an alleyway to shave minutes off her commute. "Follow her," Dante said, his voice tight. The car crept past the mouth of the alley. Dante signaled Frank to stop. In the shadows of the brick corridor, illuminated only by the flickering orange light of a distant street lamp, Hannah had been intercepted. Dante stiffened. He recognized the man immediately. It was Victor Kane. Victor was a parasite in a $3,000 suit. He was a loan shark who had risen through the ranks of the rival Moretti family by being more vicious than anyone else in the room. He dealt in misery, squeezing debtors until they broke, then selling the pieces. Dante watched, his blood turning to ice. As Victor stepped into Hannah's personal space, he was too close, much too close. Hannah's back was against the graffiti-stained wall. She was digging frantically into her bag. She produced a thick white envelope and held it out. Her hand was shaking so badly that the envelope fluttered like a trapped bird. Victor took it. He did not count it. He simply weighed it in his hand and smirked, a reptilian curling of his lips. Then, with a speed that made Dante flinch, Victor reached out and grabbed Hannah's wrist. Dante's hand shot out and gripped the door handle. His knuckles turned white. Hannah tried to pull away, her eyes wide with panic. Dante could not hear the words through the glass of the car in the distance, but he could read the body language perfectly. Victor was threatening her. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, whispering poison into her ear. Hannah was shaking her head, her lips moving in a plea. She looked small, defenseless, and utterly terrified. Dante's other hand clenched around the steering wheel, the leather groaning under the pressure of his grip. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to get out of the car. He wanted to walk into that alley, wrap his hands around Victor's throat, and squeeze until the light went out of the man's eyes. He wanted to stand between Hannah and the monster, to be the wall she could put her back against. But he could not yet. To step in now would be to reveal his hand, to start a war without knowing the battlefield. He forced himself to stay seated, forced his breathing to slow, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped animal. Hannah managed to wrench her wrist free. She stood up straighter, lifting her chin in a defiant gesture that made Dante's chest ache with a sudden, fierce pride. She spoke a few sharp words, likely promising the rest of the money soon, her posture trembling but unbroken. Victor laughed. He reached out and patted her cheek, a patronizing, possessive gesture that was more violating than a slap. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Hannah remained against the wall for a long moment after he was gone. She slumped, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders heaving once, twice, before she pulled herself together, wiped her face, and continued walking. "Drive," Dante said. His voice was a low growl. "Find out everything about her debt. I want to know how much, when it is due, and why she owes a snake like Cain." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on Sunday. It was Hannah's day off, but Dante knew by now that she did not take days off. She left her apartment early, carrying a different bag, one filled with colorful items. She took 3 buses to get to the north side of the city. Dante followed in the sedan, his mood foul, his mind still replaying the scene in the alleyway. She got off at the front entrance of St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Dante frowned. A hospital? Was she sick? Was that why she needed the money? He waited until she disappeared through the sliding glass doors. Then he opened his car door. "Wait here," he told Frank. Dante Valerio walked into the hospital with the confidence of a man who owned the land it was built on. He bypassed the reception desk, blending in with a group of visiting doctors. He kept his distance, watching the blonde head bobbing through the crowd ahead of him. She took the elevator to the 4th floor. The pediatric intensive care unit. The air up here was different. It smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. The walls were painted with cheerful cartoons that did little to mask the gravity of the equipment beeping in every room. Dante stayed back, slipping into the alcove of a vending machine as Hannah signed in at the nurses' station. The nurses knew her. They smiled sympathetically, handing her a visitor badge without asking for ID. She walked down the long corridor, her steps heavy, and slipped into room 412. Dante waited a full minute. Then, silent as a shadow, he moved down the hall. The door to room 412 was cracked open a few inches. The lights inside were dimmed, casting the room in a soft blue twilight. Dante stood in the blind spot of the door frame and looked inside. The room was dominated by a hospital bed that looked too large for its occupant. Lying amidst a tangle of tubes and wires was a boy. He could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old. He was pale, his skin translucent against the white sheets, his chest rising and falling in a shallow, mechanical rhythm dictated by the machines surrounding him. Hannah was sitting in a plastic chair pulled right up to the bedside. She had discarded her coat. She was holding a colorful picture book, reading aloud, and then the dragon said, "You cannot have the treasure, for it belongs to the mountain." Hannah read. Her voice was barely a whisper, soft and trembling, but the knight was not afraid. He held up his shield and said, "I do not want the gold. I only want to go home." She stopped reading. She closed the book and set it on the bedside table. She reached out and took the boy's small, limp hand in hers. She brought it to her lips, kissing his knuckles. "I'm sorry I am late, Noah," she whispered. Her voice cracked, fracturing under the weight of a sorrow so profound it seemed to suck the air out of the hallway. "I had to work, but I am here now. I am here." She reached out with her other hand and stroked the hair back from the boy's forehead. The monitors beeped their steady, indifferent rhythm. "I am going to fix it. Noah," she promised, her voice thick with tears. "I am going to pay him. I will not let anything happen to you. I promise. You just have to get better. Please, just get better." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against the metal rail of the bed. Her shoulders began to shake. The stoic, efficient maid who polished Dante's silver and refused his charity dissolved. In her place was a terrified sister, crumbling under a burden no one person should have to carry. She wept silently, her body racking with sobs she refused to voice, terrified of waking the boy she was trying to save. Dante stood frozen in the hallway. The scene before him hit him with the force of a physical blow. It shattered the carefully constructed armor he had worn for 20 years. He had thought she was cold. He had thought she was distant. He had suspected her of greed, of illicit dealings, of betrayal. He looked at the boy, Noah. He looked at the machines that were keeping him alive, machines that cost thousands of dollars a day to run. He thought of the worn-out shoes, the extra shifts at the diner, the humiliation in the alleyway with Victor Kane. She was doing all of this, enduring the exhaustion, the fear, the degradation, for him. For this small, fragile life in a hospital bed, she was walking through fire every single day just to keep the machines beeping for one more night. A tightness seized Dante's throat, sharp and agonizing. His vision blurred. He blinked, and to his shock, he felt a hot wetness slide down his cheek. He reached up, touching his face, staring at the moisture on his fingertips in disbelief as he was crying. Dante Valerio, the man who had ordered hits without blinking, the man who had buried rivals and walked away without looking back, was standing in a hospital corridor, weeping. The realization crashed into him, dismantling his world. He had followed her to find a weakness, to find a flaw. Instead, he had found the purest thing he had ever witnessed. He had found a love so fierce and sacrificial, it made his own life of power and accumulation look pathetic and empty. He watched her for one moment longer, etching the image of her devotion into his soul. "I never knew," he whispered to the silence, his voice breaking. "I never knew who you were." He stepped back from the door, unable to look anymore, the weight of his own ignorance crushing him. He turned and walked back down the corridor, the tears still falling, unchecked and unashamed. The Mafia boss who had followed his blonde maid every day after work finally understood the truth. And the truth was not a conspiracy or a crime. It was a brother, a sister, and a love strong enough to bring a king to his knees. The morning sun that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse felt different to Dante Valerio. For years, the light had just been illumination, a cold necessity that signaled the start of another day of strategy and enforcement. But today, the light seemed to expose things. It caught the dust motes dancing in the air, the smudge on a coaster, and, most painfully, the exhaustion etched into the lines of Hannah Reed's face as she poured his coffee. Dante sat at the head of his dining table, a newspaper spread out before him, but he had not read a single word. His eyes followed Hannah. He watched her hands as she set down the silver creamer. They were steady today, but he knew the tremor was there, lurking beneath the surface. Just as he knew the panic that lived in her chest. He had spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling. The image of her weeping by that hospital bed burned into his retinas. The revelation of who she really was, not just a maid, but a sister fighting a war against a cruel world, had shifted the gravity in the room. He no longer saw an employee. He saw a woman standing on the edge of a precipice, and he was the only one who realized she was about to fall. "Thank you, Hannah," Dante said. His voice was softer than usual, lacking its customary sharp edge. Hannah paused, the coffee pot hovering in midair. She glanced at him, her blue eyes wary. "You are welcome, Mr. Valerio." She turned to leave, but Dante felt a desperate need to keep her in the room. He wanted to bridge the gap between them, but he did not know how to build bridges. He only knew how to build walls. "How is your family?" Dante asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and clumsy. Hannah stiffened. Her back was to him, but he saw her shoulders rise. "My family is fine, sir. Thank you for asking." It was a lie, a polite, practice lie. Dante gripped his coffee cup, fighting the urge to call her out on it immediately. He wanted to shout that he knew about Noah, about the debt, about the fear she carried like a second skin, but he held back. He needed her to trust him, and trust was not something he could demand. "Do you have plans for the evening?" Dante pressed, trying to sound casual. "Perhaps you go out with friends? Or visit someone?" Hannah turned slowly to face him. Her expression was carefully blank, a mask of professional indifference. "I go home, sir. I have chores to attend to." She was dodging him. She was weaving through his questions with the same agility she used to navigate his furniture. Dante felt a flash of irritation. Not at her, but at the situation. She was lying to protect herself, and it maddened him that she felt she needed protection from him. "That will be all," Dante said, retreating behind his newspaper. Hannah nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, but the tension remained, vibrating in the silence she left behind. Throughout the day, the dynamic in the penthouse shifted. Dante was watchful, his gaze following her whenever she entered a room. He found excuses to work from the living room instead of his study. He watched her scrub the windows, noticing how she paused to rub her lower back when she thought he was not looking. He watched her check her phone, her face falling every time the screen remained dark. By late afternoon, the air outside had turned heavy and slate gray. A storm was rolling in off the harbor, the clouds bruising the sky with shades of violent violet and charcoal. The pressure in the atmosphere mirrored the pressure building inside Dante. He found her in the hallway near the laundry room. She was folding towels, her movements sharp and jerky. She looked ready to snap. "Hannah," Dante said. She jumped, dropping a white towel. She bent to retrieve it, but Dante was faster. He picked it up, and when he straightened, he stepped into her space. He did not back away. He cornered her, gently but effectively, bracing one hand against the wall near her head. He was not trapping her, but he was commanding her attention. "We need to talk," Dante said, his voice low. Hannah clutched the stack of towels against her chest like a shield. "We have nothing to talk about. Mr. Valerio, I am behind schedule." "Stop," Dante said. The single word was a command. He looked down at her, searching her face. "Why did you not tell me?" Hannah blinked, feigning confusion. "Tell you what, sir." Dante's patience, frayed by a sleepless night and a day of deception, finally snapped. His eyes darkened, a mix of anger and profound concern swirling in their depths. "About Noah," Dante said. "About the hospital. About the fact that you are drowning in debt to a man who would sell his own mother for a profit." The color drained from Hannah's face. She looked as though he had slapped her. The towel slipped from her grip, tumbling to the floor in a soft heap. She pressed her back against the wall, her eyes wide with shock. "You followed me," she whispered. The shock quickly morphed into something hotter. Her blue eyes blazed with sudden fury. "You followed me? Who gave you the right?" "I was worried about you," Dante countered, his voice rising. "You had no right to spy on me," Hannah cried, pushing away from the wall. She tried to step past him, but he blocked her path, his body a solid wall of heat and muscle. "I am not spying," Dante said, his voice rough. "I saw you with Victor Kane. I saw the fear in your eyes. Hannah, why in God's name would you go to a man like that?" Hannah laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that lacked any humor. Because I had no choice. My parents died 2 years ago. They left nothing but bills. And then Noah got sick. Do you know how much a week in the ICU costs? Do you know how much the medicine costs? She was shouting now, the dam breaking. All the fear and stress she had bottled up for months came pouring out. I work 2 jobs. I sleep 4 hours a night, and it is still not enough. When Noah took a turn for the worse, the hospital threatened to stop treatment. Victor was the only one who would give me the cash fast enough to keep my brother alive. So yes, I borrowed from him. And yes, I regret it every single second of every single day, but I did it for Noah. Her chest was heaving, her face flushed with emotion. Dante stared at her, stunned by the ferocity of her love. She was a lioness defending her cub, even if it meant tearing herself apart. I can fix it, Dante said immediately. He reached for his back pocket. I will write a check right now. I will pay off Victor. I will pay for the hospital. You will never have to worry about money again. He thought she would be relieved. He thought she would collapse into gratitude. Instead, Hannah bristled. She drew herself up, her spine stiffening with a fierce, blinding pride. No, she said firmly. Dante froze. What? I said no, Hannah repeated. I am not taking your money. It is not charity, Dante argued, frustrated. It is help. It is ownership, Hannah shot back. In your world, money always comes with strings. If you pay my debt, then I belong to you instead of Victor. I will not trade one master for another. I will not become someone's property just because they wrote a check. I am not trying to own you, Dante roared, losing control. I am trying to save you. I do not need saving. I need to do this myself. They were standing inches apart now, voices echoing off the marble walls. Dante leaned down, his face close to hers, his breath mingling with hers. He was furious that she would choose suffering over his help, furious that she saw him as just another monster like Victor. You are stubborn, Dante growled. You are so stubborn you would let yourself be crushed rather than accept a hand, and you are arrogant, Hannah retorted, her chin tilted up, refusing to back down. You think you can solve everything with a wallet and a gun. The air between them crackled. It was volatile, dangerous. They were two forces colliding, his power against her resilience, and then, in the middle of the shouting, silence fell. It was sudden and absolute. Dante looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the flush on her neck, the way her lips parted as she gasped for air. He saw a woman who was his equal in spirit, if not in status. His anger evaporated, replaced by something heavier, darker. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth. Hannah's breath hitched. She did not look away. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, brushing against his jacket with every inhalation. Dante's hand, still braced against the wall, shifted. His fingers moved closer to her shoulder, not touching, but hovering, the heat radiating from his palm. The tension in the hallway changed texture. It was no longer the sharp electricity of an argument. It was the magnetic pull of desire. Dante leaned in a fraction of an inch closer. He could smell the vanilla soap on her skin, mixed with the scent of her fear and her fire. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, neither of them moved. They just breathed, staring at each other's lips, the unspoken question hanging between them. Boom! A deafening crack of thunder shook the entire building. The lights in the hallway flickered once, twice, and then died. The penthouse was plunged into gray darkness. Hannah gasped, shrinking back against the wall. Dante instinctively moved to shield her, his hands finding her arms in the gloom. It is okay, Dante said, his voice dropping to a reassuring rumble. It is just the storm. He stepped back, giving her space, though every nerve in his body screamed at him to stay close. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating Hannah's pale face. The power is out, Dante noted. The backup generators will kick in for the elevators and security, but the main grid is down. He walked to the window. Outside, the city was vanishing behind a curtain of torrential rain. The wind was howling, battering the glass with a ferocity that made the steel frame groan. You cannot go home in this, Dante said, turning back to her. I have to, Hannah said, though her voice wavered. Noah. "The hospital has generators," Dante assured her. "Noah is safe. But the streets are flooding. The subway will be down, and walking in this wind is suicide." Hannah looked at the window, then back at him. She chewed on her lower lip, torn between her duty and the reality of the storm. "The elevators are out of service for general use until the generator fully cycles." Dante lied smoothly. He did not know if that was true, but he was not letting her walk out that door. "You are staying here tonight. I cannot stay here," Hannah protested. "It is not proper." "There is a guest room," Dante said firmly. "It has a lock. You will be safe." "I am not asking. Hannah, I am telling you, I will not have your death on my conscience because you were too proud to sleep in a warm bed." Hannah hesitated, then slumped, the fight draining out of her. Okay. The evening passed in a surreal haze. With the staff gone early to beat the storm and the power out, the massive penthouse felt like a cave. Dante found candles, thick, expensive pillars of wax, and lit them in the kitchen. They sat at the kitchen island, a simple meal of cold sandwiches and fruit between them. The flickering candlelight softened the sharp angles of Dante's face and cast dancing shadows across Hannah's features. It was intimate, in the silence of the storm, stripped of the distractions of electricity and rolls. They were just a man and a woman sitting in the dark. Hannah took a sip of water, her hand trembling slightly less than usual. "He likes nights," she said softly. Dante looked up. "Who?" "Noah," she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "That is why I was reading him that book. He loves stories about knights who slay dragons. He thinks I am a knight." Dante looked at her, at the blonde hair falling loose around her face, at the strength in her delicate jaw. "He is right," Dante said. Hannah laughed, but it sounded watery. "I do not feel like a knight. I feel like the person who gets eaten by the dragon in the first chapter. I'm so tired, Dante. I'm just so tired of being strong." She looked down at her hands. "I worry that I am failing him. Every time I leave him to come here, or to go to the diner, I feel like I'm abandoning him. But if I stay, I cannot pay for the medicine. It is a trap." Dante listened, his heart aching. He reached out and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, rough with calluses. "You are not failing him," Dante said intensely. "You are keeping him alive. That is not failure. That is heroism." Hannah looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. She turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. It was a bold move, one that surprised them both. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you ever get tired?" Dante looked into the flame of the candle. "I am always tired. Hannah." He paused, the confession sitting on his tongue. He never spoke of his work, not to anyone outside the life, but tonight, in the dark. "The rules felt different. I made choices a long time ago," Dante said quietly. "Violent choices. I thought I was doing what was necessary to survive, to protect my people. But the violence, it stains you. It seeps into your skin until you cannot remember what it felt like to be clean." He looked at her, exposing a sliver of the guilt he carried. "I have lost friends. I have lost family. I have made enemies who would burn this city to the ground just to see me choke on the ash. Sometimes I look at this penthouse, at all this glass and gold, and I realize it is just a very expensive cage." Hannah squeezed his hand. "You are not a monster. Dante." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "You do not know what I have done. I know what you did for me when I slipped," Hannah whispered. "I know you offered to pay for my brother without asking for anything in return. I know you are sitting here in the dark with your maid, eating a sandwich, because you did not want her to get wet in the rain." She leaned forward, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes. "I judge people by what I see, and I see a man who is lonely." The word hung between them. Lonely. It was the truth Dante had spent a decade running from. After they finished eating, they moved to the living room. The storm was finally breaking. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, and the wind had died down. Dante opened the sliding glass door to the balcony. The air that rushed in was cold and smelled of ozone and wet concrete. Hannah stepped out onto the balcony. She walked to the railing, looking out at the city lights that were slowly flickering back to life grid by grid. She shivered, rubbing her arms through her thin uniform. Dante moved behind her. He took off his suit jacket, the heavy wool warm from his body heat. He draped it over her shoulders. Hannah flinched slightly, then relaxed, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. It was huge on her, swallowing her small frame. "Thank you," she murmured. Dante did not step away. He stood close behind her, his chest inches from her back. He could smell the rain in her hair. He felt a magnetic pull, a gravity that was dragging him toward her. He rested his hands briefly on her upper arms. He felt her tremble, but he did not think it was from the cold. Hannah turned around slowly. She found his face inches from hers. The city light below cast an upward glow, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the darkness of his eyes. Time seemed to stretch, slowing down until the world was just the two of them, suspended in the damp night air. Hannah searched his eyes. She saw the fierce protectiveness there, the iron will of a Mafia boss, but beneath it, she saw something else, something raw, something vulnerable. Dante looked at her mouth. He waited. He gave her the choice. Hannah made a small sound in the back of her throat. She did not pull away. Instead, she tilted her head up. Dante lowered his head. Their lips met. It was slow, hesitant, a question asked and answered in the softest of whispers. Dante's lips were firm, warm, and tasting of restraint. Hannah's were soft, trembling against his. Then the dam broke. Hannah made a noise, a quiet whimper, and gripped the front of his shirt. Dante groaned low in his chest. He cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss. It was no longer hesitant, it was desperate. It was the collision of two lonely souls finding a harbor in the storm. Dante pulled her closer, his other arm wrapping around her waist, crushing her body against his. He could feel every curve of her, every breath she took. Hannah responded with a hunger that matched his own. Her hands moved up to his neck, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. She pressed herself against him, seeking his warmth, seeking his strength. For a moment, there was no debt, no mafia, no sick brother, no violence. There was only the heat of their bodies and the taste of rain and desire. But then, reality clawed its way back in. Hannah pulled back, gasping for air. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown black. Her lips were swollen, red from his. She looked at him, and he saw the panic returning. "I cannot," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I cannot do this." Dante reached for her, his hand hovering in the air. "Hannah." "No," she said, backing away, clutching his jacket around her like armor. "My life is in pieces. Dante, I cannot add this complications. I cannot be with you. It is too dangerous." She looked at him one last time, a look of longing and regret that tore at his heart, and then she turned and fled. She ran back inside, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor as she retreated to the guest room. Dante stood alone on the balcony. The wind whipped at his shirt sleeves. He touched his lips, still tasting her, still feeling the phantom pressure of her body against his. He looked out at the city, at the empire he had built, and realized it meant nothing compared to the woman who had just run away from him. He gripped the railing, the cold metal biting into his palms, and let the longing wash over him, knowing that, for the first time in his life, he had found something he could not simply take. He had to earn her, and he had no idea if he could. The morning after the storm, the air in the penthouse was brittle, as if the oxygen had been replaced by spun glass that might shatter at any moment. Hannah Reed had returned to her duties with a terrifying efficiency, rebuilding the walls between them brick by brick. She wore her uniform like armor, her eyes averting from Dante's gaze with a practiced deference that stung worse than open hostility. The intimacy of the candlelight, the shared sandwich, the way she had trembled in his arms on the balcony, it had all been swept away, scrubbed clean like one of the countertops she was currently polishing. Dante Valerio sat in his study, the door cracked open just enough to catch glimpses of her passing by. He did not try to stop her. He did not try to force a conversation. Instead, he channeled his frustration into the only language he spoke fluently: control. If he could not have her trust, he would ensure her safety. He summoned Eli Torres, his right-hand man and the only person in Harborview who dared to look him in the eye when he was in a mood like this. Eli arrived within the hour, carrying a thick manila folder. "We dug into Victor Kane," Eli said, tossing the folder onto Dante's mahogany desk. "You were right to be worried. Boss, he's not just loan sharking. He's trying to climb the ladder." Dante opened the file. It was a dossier of filth, extortion, blackmail, connections to dirty cops. But as he flipped through the pages, his hand froze. Clipped to the back of a ledger were photographs. They were grainy, taken with a long-range lens, but the subjects were unmistakable. Hannah, leaving Dante's building. Hannah walking to the bus stop. Hannah entering the hospital. Dante felt a cold rage settle in his stomach, heavy and leaden. "He knows," Dante said, his voice deadly quiet. Eli nodded grimly. "He knows she works for you. These photos were found in a safe house used by the Moretti family. Kane is not just squeezing her for the money. Dante, he's squeezing her because she is close to you. He is building leverage. If the Morettis want to make a move on the harbor territories, they think they can use the girl to get to you. Or worse, force her to be their eyes inside your house." Dante stared at the photo of Hannah, her head ducked against the wind, looking so small and defenseless. He had thought he was dealing with a simple debt. Instead, he had stumbled into a brewing war, and Hannah was standing unknowingly on the front lines. "Put a detail on her," Dante ordered, slamming the file shut. 24 hours a day. I want 2 men on her, 2 on the kid at the hospital. If Kane sneezes in her direction, I want to know about it. And Eli, make sure she does not see them. She's already spooked." Eli nodded and left, leaving Dante alone with the pictures and a growing sense of dread. Across the city, the pressure on Hannah was mounting with suffocating speed. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket while she was scrubbing the master bathroom floor. She ignored it, but it buzzed again and again. A relentless, angry insect demanding attention. She dried her hands and answered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Hello? Hannah," Victor Kane's voice oozed through the speaker. Smooth and venomous. "I was just thinking about you. And little Noah." Hannah gripped the phone, her knuckles turning white. "I told you. I will have another payment on Friday. I'm working as fast as I can. Friday is a long time away," Victor purred. "And you know, I was just speaking with my friends over at the pharmaceutical supply company. The ones who handle the special import for Noah's treatment, they are saying there might be a delay in the shipment this week. Paperwork issues. Very tragic. It would be a shame if his dosage was interrupted. I hear the withdrawal symptoms are painful." The blood drained from Hannah's face. The medication was the only thing keeping Noah's immune system from collapsing. Victor had helped facilitate the approval for the experimental drug months ago. Another hook he had sunk into her. "You cannot do that," Hannah whispered, terror choking her. "He needs that medicine. I can do whatever I want." "Hannah, I am a problem solver. If you want the problem solved, you need to show me you are serious. I want 5,000 by tomorrow night, or else the truck gets lost." The line went dead. Hannah stood in the middle of the opulent bathroom, surrounded by marble and gold, and felt like she was drowning. $5,000. It was impossible. She could sell everything she owned and not scrape together half that amount. She finished her shift in a daze, her movements mechanical. When 6 o'clock arrived, she changed into her street clothes and fled the penthouse, needing to breathe air that didn't belong to Dante Valerio. But the city offered no sanctuary. As she walked toward the bus stop, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. It was a primal instinct, the feeling of being hunted. She glanced over her shoulder. A gray sedan was creeping along the curb, matching her pace. She turned a corner sharply. The sedan turned. She stopped abruptly in front of a shop window, pretending to look at the display. In the reflection, she saw a man in a dark jacket pause half a block away, pretending to check his watch. They were everywhere. Dante's men. He was watching her. The realization ignited a spark of fury that burned through her fear. He had promised to help, but instead, he was suffocating her. He was treating her like an asset to be guarded, not a person to be respected. He was no better than Victor, just a different kind of cage. She spun around, ignoring the bus that was pulling up, and marched straight back to the high-rise she had just left. She stormed past the doorman, her face set in a mask of grim determination, and rode the elevator back up to the penthouse. The doors slid open, and she stepped into the foyer. Dante was standing by the window, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking out at the city. He turned, surprised to see her. "Hannah? You forgot something." "I did not forget anything," Hannah snapped, throwing her bag onto the floor. "I came back to tell you to call off your dogs." Dante set his glass down slowly. "I do not know what you're talking about. Do not lie to me," Hannah shouted, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The gray sedan. The man in the leather jacket on the corner. I am not stupid, Dante. I know when I am being followed." Dante's expression hardened. He crossed the room, closing the distance between them. "You are being followed because you are in danger. Hannah, Victor Kane is not just a loan shark. He's using you to get to me. So that makes it okay?" Hannah demanded, stepping into his space, her blue eyes blazing with betrayal. "You think because you are rich and powerful you can just take over my life? You spy on me. You follow me. You surround me with your goons? I am trying to keep you alive," Dante roared back, his composure cracking. "I did not ask for your protection," Hannah yelled. "I am managing it. You are not managing anything. You are drowning. I would rather drown on my own terms than be a pawn in your game." She turned to leave, her chest heaving, tears of frustration pricking at her eyes. She reached for the elevator button, but Dante moved faster than she thought possible. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Hannah!" It wasn't a violent grip, but it was firm, an anchor stopping a ship in a storm. Hannah tried to yank her arm away, but he held fast. She spun around, ready to strike him, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. He wasn't angry. He was desperate. "Please," Dante said, his voice dropping to a rough, gravelly timbre. "Please just listen to me. I am not trying to own you. I am trying to stop them from breaking you." Hannah stared at him, her breathing ragged. They were standing in the narrow hallway that led to the foyer, pressed close together. The air between them was suddenly thick, charged with the electricity of their argument. "Let go of me," she whispered, but the fight was draining out of her voice. Dante did not let go. His thumb moved unconsciously, stroking the sensitive skin of her inner wrist where her pulse was fluttering like a trapped bird. He stepped closer, crowding her against the wall until she had nowhere to retreat. "I cannot let you go," Dante murmured, his eyes dropping to her mouth. "Not when I know what is out there waiting for you." Hannah looked up at him. She saw the conflict in his face, the war between the ruthless boss and the man who had held her during the storm. Her chest brushed against his with every rapid breath she took. She felt the heat radiating from him, a physical force that seemed to pull her in. For a moment, the anger that had been consuming her twisted into something else entirely. It burned hot and fierce, a sudden, overwhelming attraction that made her knees weak. She wanted to lean into him. She wanted to let him take the weight of the world off her shoulders. But then she remembered Victor's phone call. She remembered the threat against Noah. She remembered that in Dante's world, people were leverage, and affection was a weakness. She shoved him. It took Dante by surprise. He stumbled back a step, his grip on her wrist breaking. "No," Hannah said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I will not do this. I will not be the damsel you save so you can feel better about the blood on your hands. Hannah, I quit." She said, the words hung in the air, final and sharp. Dante stared at her, stunned. "You what?" "I quit," Hannah repeated, picking up her bag. "I would rather scrub floors in 10 crappy apartments than feel trapped in this world for one more second. Keep your money. Keep your protection. I will save my brother myself." She turned and hit the elevator button. The doors opened immediately. She stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby, refusing to look at him as the doors slid shut, sealing him away in his glass tower. Dante stood there for a full minute, the silence of the penthouse ringing in his ears. She was gone. She had walked away from the safest place in the city because he had squeezed too tight. He cursed, a vicious, sharp sound, and grabbed his coat. He was stubborn. He was arrogant. But he was not a man who let the things he cared about walk into a fire he could extinguish. He did not take the car. He did not call Frank. He walked out of the building and hailed a cab, giving the driver the address he had memorized from her personnel file, an address in a neighborhood where the streetlights were broken and the police rarely patrolled. 20 minutes later, he stood in front of a crumbling brick walk-up. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. He climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, his expensive Italian leather shoes making no sound on the warped wood. He knocked on apartment 4B. There was a long silence. Then the sound of a chain sliding back. The door opened a few inches. Hannah stood there, still in her street clothes, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw him, she tried to slam the door. Dante blocked it with his hand, pushing it open gently but firmly. "We are not finished. Hannah, go away," she cried, backing up into the room. Dante stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For the first time, he saw where she lived. It was a tiny studio apartment, cramped and dimly lit. The furniture was mismatched and worn, a sagging beige couch, a table with one leg propped up by a book. But it was clean, painfully clean. And on the small table, illuminated by a single lamp, was a pile of bills. Red overdue stamps screamed from the envelopes. Hannah stood in the middle of the room, hugging her arms around herself. "You have no right to be here. Get out." Dante ignored the command. He walked further into the room, his presence filling the small space. He looked at the bills. He looked at the empty refrigerator visible in the kitchenette. Then he looked at her. She was wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt. In the harsh light of the apartment, he saw what the uniform had hidden. On her upper arm, dark purple bruises bloomed against her pale skin. They were distinct. 4 finger marks on the inside, a thumb mark on the outside, the grip of a man who wanted to hurt. Dante stopped moving. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The rage he had felt earlier was a candle flame compared to the inferno that ignited in his chest. Now, he crossed the room in 2 strides. Hannah tried to back away, bumping into the table, but he reached out. He did not grab her. He took her hand gently, lifting her arm to inspect the marks. "Who did this?" Dante asked. His voice was unrecognizable. It was a low, terrifying vibration that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. Hannah flinched, trying to pull her arm back. "It is nothing. I bumped into—" "Do not lie to me," Dante snarled, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "Was it Kane? Did he touch you?" Hannah trembled. The intensity of his gaze was overwhelming. She'd seen him angry, but she had never seen him like this. He looked like he was ready to burn the city down to finding the man who had laid a finger on her. He grabbed me," she whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. "In the alley. He just wanted to scare me." Dante looked at the bruises, his thumb brushing the air above them, afraid to cause her pain even by touching the skin. He threatened Noah. She confessed, the words tumbling out in a sob. He said he would stop the medication. "Dante, I'm so scared I'm going to lose him. And now you are here. And I am scared of you. And I do not know what to do." She broke down, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of her weeping. Dante's heart shattered. He saw the terror he and his world had inflicted on this woman who deserved nothing but peace. "I promise you," Dante said softly, stepping closer. Hannah looked up through her fingers. "I promise you," he repeated, his voice dropping to a vow. "No one will ever touch you like that again. I will cut the hands off any man who tries." He reached out and cupped her face with both hands. His thumbs swept away the tears that were tracking down her cheeks. He looked at her not as a boss, not as a Mafia don, but as a man who had finally found the one thing he could not live without. Hannah searched his eyes. She saw the violence there. Yes, but it was directed outward, away from her, toward her. She saw only a fierce, consuming adoration. "Dante," she breathed. He kissed her. This was not the hesitant, gentle kiss on the balcony. This was desperate. It was a collision of fear and relief and pent-up longing. Dante's mouth moved over hers with a hungry tenderness, claiming her, tasting the salt of her tears. Hannah made a small, broken sound and knotted her hands in the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. She needed this. She needed to feel something other than fear. She needed to feel alive. They stumbled backward, their legs tangling, until the back of Hannah's knees hit the old couch. They collapsed onto it, Dante following her down, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her body flush against his. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent, his hands splaying protectively across her back as if he could physically shield her from the threats outside the door. Hannah clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her head falling back. The kiss deepened, becoming a rhythm of breath and heartbeat. Dante's hand moved to her waist, his touch possessing but reverent. For a moment, the desire simmering between them threatened to boil over, hot and uncontrollable. Then Hannah started to tremble. It wasn't passion. It was the aftershocks of adrenaline and grief. Dante stilled instantly. He pulled back, his heavy breathing filling the quiet room. He searched her eyes, checking for fear, checking if he had pushed too far. "Hannah?" he whispered. She shook her head shakily, her chest heaving. I cannot." "It is okay," Dante said immediately, smoothing her hair back from her damp forehead. "I am here." We stop. He started to pull away, to give her space, but Hannah reached out and grabbed his hand. "No," she said, her voice small. "Do not go. Just hold me. Please. I do not want to be alone." Dante softened. He shifted his weight, settling onto the couch beside her. He pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her tightly. Hannah curled into him, tucking her head under his chin, pressing her forehead against the solid wall of his chest. He held her. He simply held her. They stayed like that for a long time, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the steady thump of Dante's heart beneath Hannah's ear. Slowly, the trembling in her limbs subsided. "Dante," she murmured into his shirt. "I am here. You cannot control me," she said, her voice muffled but firm. "If I let you help." "You cannot lock me in a tower. I need to be able to breathe. I need to make my own choices." Dante rested his chin on the top of her head. "I know. I was wrong to have you followed without telling you. I was trying to protect you the only way I knew how, but I see now that it only made you feel trapped." He pulled back slightly so he could look her in the eye. "We do this together," Dante said. "I will help you with Victor, but we do it on your terms. I will tell you everything, no secrets, no shadows, and when this is over, if you want to walk away, if you want to never see me again, I will let you go. I will not replace one cage with another." Hannah studied his face, looking for the lie, but she found only grim honesty. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we do it together. For Noah." "For Noah," Dante agreed. "And for you." He kissed her forehead, a lingering seal on their pact. In the dim light of the tiny apartment, amidst the unpaid bills and the threat of war, they clung to each other, partners in a fragile alliance, bound by a love that had finally found the courage to speak its name. The takedown of Victor Kane was not a loud, explosive event. It was a surgical dismantling, executed with the cold precision of a master chess player. For 3 days, Dante Valerio and Eli Torres sat in the command center of the penthouse, surrounded by monitors and stacks of paper, pulling the threads of Victor's life until the entire tapestry began to unravel. They found the weak link in a terrified bookkeeper named Saul, a man who valued his knees more than his loyalty to a loan shark, with a bribe that cost less than one of Dante's suits. Saul handed over the ledgers. They detailed everything: money laundering, extortion, payoffs to port officials. It was enough to send Victor to prison for 3 lifetimes. But Dante did not want prison. He wanted obliteration. He wanted to ensure that when Victor fell, he took every shadow that haunted Hannah with him. "We have him," Eli said, tapping a finger on a highlighted spreadsheet. "We cut off his supply line from the north yesterday. His accounts are frozen as of this morning. The banks are spooked. By tomorrow noon, He will not be able to buy a pack of gum in this city. Dante nodded, leaning back in his chair. He rubbed his temples. He had not slept properly in days, his mind constantly drifting to Hannah. She was safe for now, guarded by his best men, but the distance between them felt like a physical ache. "Finish it," Dante said quietly. "I want the police to have this file by tonight, but leave his name off the flight manifests. I want him trapped here." He thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted the brute, but Dante had made the mistake of assuming Victor Kane played by the rules of logic. He forgot that a cornered rat does not surrender. It bites. Across town, Victor sat in his office, the walls closing in. His phone had stopped ringing with business offers and started ringing with threats from his own bosses. He knew who was behind it. Valerio, the high and mighty king of the tower. Victor looked at the picture of Hannah he had kept on his desk. He traced the line of her jaw with a dirty fingernail. If he was going down, he was going to take Dante's heart with him, and he knew exactly where that heart was beating. It started with a text message to a nurse at St. Jude S., a nurse whose husband owed Victor a gambling debt he could never repay. Hannah received the call while she was on her break at the diner. It was the nurse, Sarah, her voice trembling so badly Hannah could barely understand her. "Hannah, please," Sarah stammered. "I have a message. Victor, he says he is done. He says the heat is too much. He wants to cash out and leave the city." Hannah gripped the phone, her instincts flaring. "What does that have to do with me? He says if you meet him with $5,000, just 5,000. Whatever you have, he will sign a release for the debt. He will wipe the slate clean, and—" Sarah paused, a sob catching in her throat. "He says he has signed over the rights to the medication shipment. If you do not come to sign the papers, the shipment goes back to the warehouse, and Noah misses his cycle." The threat hit Hannah like a bucket of ice water. $5,000 was everything she had managed to scrape together by selling her mother's jewelry and emptying her meager savings. But to be free? To have Noah's medicine secured? Where? Hannah asked, her voice steel. "The old textile factory on River Street." Sarah whispered, "Please, Hannah. He said if you do not come alone, he burns the papers." Hannah hung up. She knew it was dangerous. She knew she should call Dante. But the memory of their argument, of her fierce declaration of independence, held her back. And beneath that pride was fear that if she involved Dante, it would turn into a war, and Noah would be the collateral damage. "I can do this," she told herself. Just one meeting, just one signature. She left the diner through the back door, slipping away before Dante's shadow detail could spot her. She took a taxi, her hands clutching the envelope of cash so tight her fingers ached. When she arrived at the textile factory, the street was deserted. The building was a hollowed-out shell of brick and broken glass. Hannah stepped out of the taxi, telling the driver to wait. He did not wait. As soon as she closed the door, a black van screeched around the corner, blocking the taxi's path. 2 men in ski masks jumped out. Hannah turned to run, but she was too slow. Rough hands grabbed her arms, pinning them to her sides. She screamed, kicking and thrashing, but a heavy cloth was pressed over her mouth. The smell of chemicals filled her nose. The last thing she saw before the world went black was the envelope of cash falling into a puddle of dirty water. At the same moment, 3 miles away, an ambulance pulled up to the loading dock of the Children's Hospital. 2 men in paramedic uniforms walked briskly into the ICU. They flashed paperwork at the confused head nurse, transfer orders, signed by the hospital administrator, forged perfectly by Victor's forger. "We need to move the boy in room 412 immediately." One of them said, "Equipment failure in this wing. Fire hazard." Before the nurse could verify the order, they had Noah on a gurney. He was half asleep, clutching his stuffed dragon, his eyes wide and confused as they wheeled him out into the cold afternoon air and shoved him into the back of the waiting ambulance. Dante felt the silence before he heard the news. He was in the penthouse, pouring a drink, when he realized he had not received an update from the tail team in 2 hours. He picked up his phone. Dialed. It went straight to voicemail. A cold dread coiled in his stomach. He dialed Eli. "Where is she?" Dante demanded. Eli's voice was tight. "We lost her. Boss, she slipped out the back of the diner. The boys found her phone in a dumpster 3 blocks away." Dante's glass shattered against the wall. The sound of crystal exploding was the only punctuation to the roar of fury that ripped from his throat. "Find her!" Dante bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. "Turn this city upside down. If she is hurt, I will kill everyone." Then his other line rang. It was the hospital. "Mr. Valerio?" the administrator squeaked. "We have a problem. There was a transfer order for Noah Reed. But the paperwork. It does not match our records. The boy is gone." Dante dropped the phone. The blood drained from his face, leaving him gray and ghostly. He staggered back, bracing himself against the table. Noah. They had Noah. The fear that seized him was not the calculated fear of a businessman losing a deal. It was a primal, agonizing terror that felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He had promised her. He had looked her in the eye and promised she would be safe. His phone buzzed again. An unknown number. Dante picked it up, his hand trembling with a rage so potent it felt like poison. "Speak!" Dante snarled. "Valerio." Victor Kane's voice came through, smug and tinny. "You've been a very naughty boy. Freezing my accounts, that was not polite." "Where are they?" Dante asked. His voice was dead, flat. "They are with me," Victor said, "and they are charming company. The girl has fire. I like that. And the kid, he cries a lot, but we can fix that. If you touch a hair on their heads," Dante whispered, "I will peel the skin from your bones." Victor laughed. "Such drama. Here is the deal. You want them back? Come to the shipping yards, Warehouse 4 on the East Pier, and come alone. No Eli, no cops, just you. If I see one other car, if I smell a setup, I put a bullet in the girl first, then the boy, then I burn the bodies. You have 1 hour." The line clicked dead. Dante stood frozen for a second, then he moved. He went to his safe. Punching in the code with blurring speed, he pulled out a black tactical vest, strapping it over his silk shirt. He grabbed 2 handguns, checking the magazines with mechanical efficiency. He grabbed a knife. Sliding it into his boot, Eli burst into the room. "Boss, we tracked the call. It is the docs. We are ready to roll." "Stay back," Dante ordered, not looking up. "What?" Eli stared at him. "It is a trap." "Dante, you know it is a trap. You cannot go alone." "I have to," Dante said. He turned to face his friend, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "He has Noah. He said he would kill them if I bring an army." "So we do not bring an army," Eli said, stepping forward. "We bring a ghost squad. Me and Marco. We go in from the water. We stay dark. You walk in the front door, keep him talking. We take the shots when you give the signal." Dante hesitated. He trusted Eli with his life, but trusting him with Hannah's life? That was a weight he did not know if he could share, but he knew he had no choice. If he walked in alone, Victor would kill him and then kill them anyway. Victor had nothing left to lose. "Fine," Dante said, "but if they see you, they won't." Eli promised. Dante moved to the elevator. As the doors closed, he pulled out his phone. He opened his saved messages. There was one from 3 nights ago, recorded at 3 in the morning during the storm. A message she had never sent but that his surveillance software had archived. He pressed play. "Dante." Hannah's voice filled the small metal box. It was soft, sleepy, and laced with confusion. "I am staring at the ceiling and I cannot sleep. I keep thinking about what you said, about your choices. I should hate you. By all rights, I should hate everything you stand for. But I do not know how to hate you, and that scares me more than anything." Dante closed his eyes. A single tear escaped, tracking hot through the stubble on his cheek. He wiped it away angrily, his hand shaking. "I am coming," he whispered to the phone. "Hold on, Hannah, I am coming." The warehouse was a cavernous tomb of rusted metal and rotting wood. It smelled of diesel fuel and brine. In the center of the vast, empty space, a single worklight cast a harsh, yellow glare. Hannah sat on a wooden crate, her hands zip-tied behind her back. Her hair was messy, her cheek bruised where she had been struck, but her head was high. She was not looking at Victor, who paced in front of her with a pistol in his hand. She was looking at Noah. Noah was sitting on the floor next to her, clutching her leg. He was trembling, his face pale and tear-streaked. "It is okay. Noah," Hannah whispered, forcing her voice to be steady. "Remember the story? The dragon trapped the knight in a cave." But the knight was smart. He knew the dragon could not see in the dark. "I want to go home," Noah whimpered. "We will go home," Hannah promised. "Dante is coming. He's the best knight. He will not let the dragon win." Victor stopped pacing and sneered. "You think your boyfriend is coming to save you. He is a businessman." "Sweetheart, he's probably calculating if you are worth the risk. Spoiler alert, you are not. He's worth 10 of you," Hannah spat, her eyes flashing. "You are just a coward with a gun." Victor raised his hand to backhand her, but a sound from the heavy metal doors stopped him. Creak, boom. The small service door opened. Dante Valerio stepped into the pool of yellow light. He held his hands up, palms open, showing he was unarmed. His weapons were tucked into the back of his waistband, hidden by his coat. "I am here," Dante called out. His voice echoed through the rafters, calm and commanding. Victor spun around, aiming the gun at Dante. "Just you?" "Just me," Dante lied. He walked forward slowly, his eyes locking onto Hannah. He saw the bruise on her cheek, and a red haze threatened to cloud his vision. He forced it back. He needed to be cold. He needed to be precise. "Let them go." "Victor," Dante said, "You want me. You have me. Let the girl and the boy walk out." Victor laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "I do not think so. I think I like having insurance." He grabbed Hannah by her hair, yanking her to her feet. She cried out, stumbling. Victor pressed the barrel of the gun to her temple. "Hannah!" Noah screamed, trying to reach for her. "Stay down, Noah!" Hannah yelled. Dante stopped moving. He was 10 feet away. He could see the sweat beading on Victor's forehead. He could see the tremor in Victor's hand. The man was unraveling. "You broke everything, Valerio," Victor hissed. "You took my money. You took my reputation. Now I'm going to take your toy." He cocked the hammer of the gun. The click was deafening in the silence. Dante's eyes flicked to the shadows in the rafters. He saw a tiny glimmer of movement. Eli was in position, but Eli could not take the shot. Victor was using Hannah as a human shield. If Eli fired, the bullet might pass through Victor and hit her, or Victor's reflex might pull the trigger against her head. Dante had to make the opening. "Victor." "Look at me," Dante said, his voice dropping to a hypnotic low. "You kill her. You die. You know that. There is no version of this where you walk out if she falls. But if you let her go, we can talk about a plane ticket. We can talk about money." "Money?" Victor scoffed. "You froze my money. I have cash in the car," Dante said. 2 million, untraceable. It is yours. Just let her go." Greed flickered in Victor's eyes. For a split second, the gun wavered away from Hannah's temple as he glanced toward the door. That was the moment. "Now!" Dante roared. He did not reach for his gun. He lunged. He covered the 10 feet in a blur of motion, launching himself not at Victor, but at Hannah. He slammed into her, shoving her hard to the side, away from Victor's grip. Bang! Victor's gun went off. Dante felt the impact like a sledgehammer to his left shoulder. The bullet ripped through muscle and bone, spinning him around. He grunted, hitting the concrete hard. "Dante!" Hannah screamed. The warehouse erupted. From the rafters, Eli and Marco opened fire. Bullets rained down, sparking off the concrete floor. Victor's men, hidden in the shadows, fired back. Victor, realizing he had missed the kill shot, scrambled back, raising his gun to finish Dante off. But Hannah was not just a damsel. She was a sister who had fought for survival every day of her life. Seeing Dante fall, seeing the blood spreading on his shirt, something in her snapped. She was on the ground where Dante had shoved her. She scrambled up, screaming in pure rage. She lunged at Victor from the side. She slammed her elbow into his ribs with every ounce of strength she possessed. Victor grunted, his aim going wide as he fired another shot into the ceiling. Hannah stomped on his foot, the heel of her boot crunching down on his instep. Victor howled, shoving her away. She flew backward, hitting a stack of crates, but she had bought the time. Dante was up on one knee. His left arm hung useless at his side, blood pouring down his chest, but his right hand was steady. He held his gun leveled. His eyes were black pits of judgment. "For her," Dante whispered. He pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Victor in the center of his chest. He staggered back, a look of shock on his face, and collapsed onto a pile of fuel drums. But the chaos was not over. One of the stray bullets from Victor's panicked men had punctured a drum. The spark from a muzzle flash ignited the fumes. Whoosh! A wall of fire roared to life, instantly separating Dante, Hannah, and Noah from the exit. The flames licked up the dry wood of the crates, climbing the walls with terrifying speed. "Hannah, get Noah!" Dante shouted over the roar of the fire. Hannah scrambled to Noah, scooping the terrified boy into her arms. She looked around. The fire was spreading in a circle, trapping them against the back wall. The heat was already blistering. "We are trapped!" she screamed, coughing as thick black smoke began to fill the air. Dante stumbled toward them, gripping his wounded shoulder. He looked up. The skylight. It was 30 feet up. Impossible. He looked at the wall of fire. It was growing. The sirens were wailing in the distance, getting closer. But they would be too late. "Get behind me," Dante ordered, guiding them into the corner furthest from the flames. He pushed Hannah and Noah behind a rusted metal lathe, using his own body as a shield against the heat. He slumped against the metal, his vision swimming. The blood loss was making him dizzy. "Dante, you're bleeding!" Hannah cried, pressing her hands against his wound, trying to staunch the flow. "It is okay," Dante slurred, his hand finding her cheek, smearing blood and soot on her pale skin. "I got you. I promised." The warehouse groaned as the roof beams began to buckle under the heat. The world narrowed down to the roar of the fire, the wail of sirens, and the terrified eyes of the woman he loved as they huddled together in the heart of the inferno, waiting for salvation or the end. Part 6. The roar of the fire was not a sound. It was a physical vibration that rattled the marrow of Hannah's bones. The warehouse, once a cavernous tomb of cold steel and shadows, had transformed into a living throat of orange and black. Swallowing air and spitting out suffocating heat, the smoke was a thick, oily curtain that stung her eyes and tasted of burning rubber and chemical death. Hannah coughed, her lungs spasms of protest, and pulled the neck of her shirt up over her nose. Beside her, Noah was screaming, a high, thin sound of pure terror that was barely audible over the inferno. He clung to her waist, burying his face in her stomach, his small body trembling so violently it shook her own. "Dante." Hannah squinted through the gray haze. Dante was on the ground a few feet away, a heavy wooden beam. Part of the collapsing mezzanine had fallen across his lower body, pinning his legs. He was slumped sideways, half-conscious, the blood from his shoulder wound soaking his white shirt until it looked like a jagged red map. "Dante!" Hannah screamed, her voice raw. She grabbed Noah by the shoulders, pushing him down behind the metal lathe they were using for cover. "Stay here. Noah, keep your head down. Do not move." She did not wait for an answer, ignoring the blistering heat that singed the fine hairs on her arms. Hannah crawled across the debris-strewn floor toward Dante. Dante groaned as she reached him. He blinked, his eyes unfocused and glassy with shock. He tried to push himself up, but his arm gave out, and he collapsed back against the concrete. "Hannah," he rasped, his voice a ruined whisper. "Get out. Take the boy. Leave me. No," Hannah said. The word was a snarl. She grabbed the beam, pinning his legs. It was thick, solid oak, burning at one end. She shoved it with all her strength. It did not move. "Go," Dante commanded, gritting his teeth as pain washed over him. "The wall is weak on the east side. You can break through. Save Noah. We go together," Hannah shouted back. She dug her heels into the floor, her hands blistering as she pushed against the rough wood. "We go together or we do not go at all." She shoved again, a primal scream tearing from her throat. The beam shifted an inch. Suddenly, small hands were beside hers. Noah. He had crawled out from his hiding spot, tears streaming down his soot-stained face, and was pushing against the wood with his terrified strength. "Noah, push!" Hannah cried. Dante looked at them, the woman who had scrubbed his floors and the boy he had never met until tonight, fighting the weight of a collapsing building to save him. The man who had spent his life believing he was alone, believing he was destined to die violently and unmourned, felt something break inside him that had nothing to do with his injuries. He roared, a sound of pure will, and planted his hands on the ground. Ignoring the agony in his shoulder and crushed legs, he leveraged his body upward. 1, 2, 3, Hannah yelled. They pushed. Dante pulled. With a grinding screech of wood against concrete, the beam rolled 6 inches. It was enough. Dante dragged his legs free, gasping as sensation returned to his crushed limbs. Hannah grabbed him under his good arm, hauling him up. He stumbled, heavy and bleeding, leaning his weight on her. The fire was closing in. The exit was a wall of flame. We are not going to make it, Dante thought, his vision swimming. Then the world exploded inward. The west wall of the warehouse shattered. A massive construction loader, driven by one of Dante's men, smashed through the brickwork like a battering ram, sending dust and debris flying. Through the gaping hole, water cannons blasted, carving a path through the fire. Eli Torres leapt through the breach, followed by 2 fire crews clad in heavy gear. "Boss!" Eli shouted, his face frantic. "Over here!" Hannah screamed, waving her free arm. Eli reached them in seconds. He grabbed Dante's other side, taking the weight off Hannah. Firefighters swooped in, scooping Noah up and guiding Hannah toward the break in the wall. They stumbled out into the cool, biting night air. The sudden drop in temperature felt like a shock. Red and blue lights flashed rhythmically, painting the wet pavement in chaotic colors. Paramedics were waiting with stretchers. As they laid Dante down, he reached out, his bloody hand grasping for Hannah. "Hannah," he whispered. "I am here," she sobbed, gripping his hand. "I am right here." They loaded him into the ambulance, the doors slamming shut on his pale, soot-streaked face, leaving Hannah standing in the chaos, clutching Noah to her chest as the adrenaline finally crashed, leaving her shaking and gasping for air. The hospital waiting room was a purgatory of fluorescent lights and hushed voices. Hannah sat on a vinyl chair, Noah asleep across her lap. She looked like a specter of war. Her face was gray with soot, her clothes stiff with dried blood and water, her hands trembling where they rested on Noah's back. 2 detectives approached her. They looked tired and skeptical. "Miss Reed?" the older one asked, flipping open a notebook. "We need to ask you about what happened at the warehouse. We know Dante Valerio was involved. We know about Victor Kane's body found at the scene." Hannah looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. She knew this moment mattered. She knew that one wrong word could send Dante to prison for the rest of his life. She thought of the man who had followed her to make sure she was safe, the man who had walked into a trap unarmed, the man who had taken a bullet for her. "Mister, Valerio saved our lives," Hannah said, her voice steady and loud enough for the nearby nurses to hear. "Victor Kane kidnapped my brother and me. He was going to kill us, mister. Valerio found us. He came for us when no one else would. He is a hero." The detectives exchanged a glance. "He's a known crime figure." "Miss Reed," the detective pressed, "you are saying he was just acting as a good Samaritan?" "I am saying he saved a child from a monster," Hannah said, her tone carrying a frosty finality. "And he almost died doing it. If you want to arrest someone, go arrest the men who took a sick boy from his hospital bed." She turned her attention back to Noah, ending the interrogation. She had drawn her line in the sand. She belonged to him, and he belonged to her, and the world could think whatever it wanted. It was 2 days before Dante fully woke. He drifted up from the darkness of anesthesia to the rhythmic beeping of monitors. His body felt like it had been dismantled and put back together by someone missing the instructions. His shoulder throbbed with a dull, heavy ache, and his chest felt tight beneath layers of bandages. He blinked his eyes open. The room was dim. He turned his head to the side. Hannah was there. She was slumped in a visitor's chair, her head resting on the edge of his mattress. Her blonde hair was spilled across the white sheets. She was wearing clean clothes, a soft gray sweater, but she looked exhausted. Her hand was resting near his hip, and even in her sleep, her pinky finger was hooked around his thumb. Dante watched her for a long time. He memorized the curve of her cheek, the flutter of her eyelashes, the steady rise and fall of her breath. He felt a swelling in his chest that had nothing to do with his injuries. It was a fullness, a terrifying sense of completeness. He shifted his hand, closing his fingers around hers. Hannah stirred. She lifted her head, blinking sleep from her eyes. When she saw him looking at her, she froze. Dante. She breathed. She scrambled up, leaning over him, her hands hovering as if she wanted to touch him but was afraid of hurting him. "You are awake," she whispered, tears instantly filling her eyes. "You are awake." "Hey," Dante croaked. His voice sounded like gravel. Hannah let out a wet, choked laugh. "You idiot," she said, a tear escaping and tracking down her nose. "You absolute idiot. You almost died. I had to," Dante murmured, a weak smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You are very high maintenance. Hannah Reed," she sobbed, pressing her forehead gently against his uninjured shoulder. "Do not joke. Please do not joke. I was so scared." Dante's smile faded. He lifted his hand, his movements heavy and slow, and placed it on the back of her head, stroking her hair. "I am sorry," he said softly. Hannah pulled back to look at him, her face wet. "Sorry for what? For saving us. For everything before that," Dante said. His dark eyes searched hers, raw and unguarded. "For following you, for making you afraid. I never wanted to be another shadow in your life. Hannah," he took a breath, wincing as his ribs expanded. "You changed me." He confessed, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "Watching you, seeing you fight for Noah, seeing how you loved him even when you had nothing. It wrecked me. I thought I was strong. I thought I was untouchable. But you are the strongest person I have ever met. And the thought of a world without you in it, it terrified me more than death." Hannah stared at him. She saw the truth in his eyes. She saw the man beneath the reputation, the man who had wept in a hospital doorway because he had finally understood what love looked like. "You terrify me," Hannah admitted, her voice trembling. Dante's face fell slightly, but she shook her head, pressing her hand over his heart. "No. Listen," she said. "You terrify me because you make me feel safer than anyone ever has. I have spent my whole life holding up the sky. Dante, I am so tired, but when you are there, I feel like I can finally put it down." She leaned in closer, her gaze drifting to his lips. "I do not care about the myths," she whispered. "I do not care what people whisper about you in the dark. I love the man who held me in the storm. I love the man who took a bullet from my brother. I love you." Dante let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for years. He reached up, his fingers curling around the back of her neck, pulling her down. "Hannah," he groaned. Their lips met. It was not a hungry, desperate kiss like the one in her apartment. It was careful. It was tender. It was a sealing of a covenant. Hannah splayed her hand over the bandages on his chest, feeling the steady, rhythmic thump of his heart, a heart that beat for her. The weeks that followed were a time of dismantling and rebuilding. Victor Kane's death left a power vacuum in the underworld, but Dante had no interest in filling it with more violence. With Eli's help, he handed over the evidence they had collected to the federal authorities. It led to a cascade of arrests within the rival syndicate, clearing the board. Dante began to shift the weight of the Valerio empire. He sold off the loan sharking operations, closed down the smuggling routes, and moved his capital into construction, shipping logistics, and real estate. He kept the strength. He was still a man people feared, but he washed the blood from the money. He delegated the darker necessities to lieutenants he trusted. Stepping back from the front lines, he had something to lose now, and he refused to risk it. With the debt erased and Victor gone, Hannah's life transformed. Dante anonymously funded a medical foundation that covered Noah's treatment in full. He did not do it for credit. He did it because watching Noah run across a room was the only payment he needed. Hannah and Noah moved out of the cramped studio and into a modest, sun-drenched apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It had 2 bedrooms, a balcony with plants, and windows that looked out onto a park instead of a brick wall. One evening, 3 months after the fire, Dante came over for dinner. He was still healing, his shoulders stiff on rainy days, but he moved with a new lightness. He stood in Hannah's small kitchen, chopping vegetables while she stirred a pot of sauce. They moved around each other in an easy, domestic dance. He bumped her shoulder with his. She swatted his hand away when he tried to steal a piece of raw pepper. They exchanged smirks, the tension between them warm and comfortable, lacking the sharp edge of fear that had once defined them. Music played softly from Hannah's phone on the counter, an old jazz standard. Dante set the knife down. He wiped his hands on a towel and turned to her. "Dance with me," he said. Hannah laughed, stirring the sauce. "The food will burn." "Let it burn," Dante said, reaching for her. He pulled her into his arms. He placed one hand at the small of her back, the other threading through her fingers. They swayed in the small kitchen, the smell of garlic and basil filling the air. Dante pulled her closer until her head rested on his chest. He rested his chin on her hair. "You know," he murmured, the vibration of his voice humming against her, "this feels more dangerous than any gunfight." Hannah looked up at him, smiling. "Cooking pasta? No," Dante said, his eyes serious. "Being happy, having this, it is terrifying." Hannah reached up and touched his face, tracing the faint scar near his ear. "It is worth it," she said. Later, after Noah had gone to sleep, they curled up together on her beige couch under a thick knitted blanket. The television was on low, casting a blue glow over the room. Dante's hand rested on Hannah's thigh, his thumb drawing slow, lazy circles on the denim of her jeans. They talked about small things, Hannah's plans to go back to nursing school, Dante's new project renovating the waterfront. They talked about the future not as a vague, frightening concept, but as a plan they were building together. Dante shifted, turning her face toward his. He kissed her. It started slow, unhurried, a tasting of familiarity and peace. But as his hand slid up to cup her jaw, the kiss deepened. It became full of promise, a silent language of gratitude and desire. They explored each other with a gentle intensity, pulling back only when the emotions threatened to overwhelm them, choosing to savor the nearness rather than rush past it. This intimacy was not about hunger. It was about trust, hard-won, fire-tested trust. The final scene took place on a hill overlooking Harborview. It was a crisp autumn day, the sky a piercing, brilliant blue. Dante and Hannah stood side by side in the grass. In front of them were two simple headstones, Hannah's parents. A few yards away, Noah was running, trailing a bright red kite that danced in the wind. His laughter carried on the breeze, pure and unburdened. Dante wore a black coat, his hands in his pockets. He looked out at the city below, at the steel and glass towers, and then at the small boy running free. He put his arm around Hannah's shoulders, pulling her into his side. "I do not know if I can ever fully wash it off," Dante admitted, his voice rough with honesty. "The blood, the past. It is part of who I am." Hannah leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. She laced her fingers with his, squeezing tight. "I'm not asking you to be perfect." "Dante," she said softly, "I am not asking you to rewrite history." She looked up at him, her blue eyes reflecting the sky. "I am only asking you to keep walking away from the darkness," she said, "step by step, just like you have been. I want you to be the man Noah looks up to, the man I see." Dante looked at Noah, then down at the woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved. "I can do that," he promised. They turned and began to walk down the hill, hand in hand, leaving the shadows of the past among the graves. Noah saw them coming and ran ahead, the kite soaring higher and higher into the light. And for the first time in his life, the Mafia boss whose tears once fell in a hospital doorway felt like he was moving toward a future he actually deserves, with the blonde maid who changed everything by simply living bravely, loving fiercely, and refusing to give up. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Dante and Hannah as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below telling me which country you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, Please make sure to hit that subscribe button for Mafia romance stories so you never miss an upload. And don't be shy. Share your thoughts on the ending in the comments section in English. I read them all. Until next time.